The mountain had never asked Elijah Crow for love, only endurance. For nearly 40 years he had given it exactly that. He lived alone in a small cabin he built with his own hands, where pine trees stood close like silent guards, and winter stayed longer than it should. The snow came early, the wind cut deep, and the cold taught him one simple rule. Warmth was earned, not expected. Down in the valley, people called him the Mountain Man. They said his shoulders were shaped by axes and storms, and his voice was so quiet because he had no one to speak to. Most folks treated him like the ridges above, solid, distant, and hard to reach. They did not wonder much about his heart. If they did, they assumed it was as tough as the granite under his boots. Elijah did not argue with any of it. He had learned long ago that needing people could break a man. Solitude felt safer. He could depend on his hands, his tools, and the steady rhythm of the seasons. Yet, as the years piled up, the nights began to feel longer. The wind sounded louder. The cabin felt too quiet, as if the silence itself was pressing in. Then, a letter arrived. It was creased and smelled faintly of ink and dust. Elijah stood at his table and read it twice, not because it was long, but because the words felt strange in his life. The letter offered a marriage arranged more from need than love. A woman would come to him, and in return he would give her a home, food, and safety. It was not written like a love story. It was written like an agreement. Elijah accepted it with the same calm he gave a coming storm. He told himself it made sense. Loneliness had started to echo louder than the wind at night, and maybe a woman under his roof would quiet that sound. He did not tell himself to hope. Hope was a dangerous thing. It could make a man careless. The letter described the woman in a few plain lines. She was widowed, quiet, used to hardship, willing to come to the mountains for a life that promised little softness. Elijah folded the paper and placed it in the pocket of his wool coat. He told himself the arrangement would be fair, even if it was never warm. On the morning she was supposed to arrive, the mountain woke under a pale sky. Frost clung to the edges of the world like thin glass. Elijah stood outside his cabin longer than usual, listening for a sound he had not listened for in years, another human presence. He told himself not to expect much, not to imagine laughter in the cabin or long talks by the fire. Expectation became disappointment, and disappointment had no place in a life built on survival. Still, his eyes kept returning to the narrow trail that cut through the trees. When the wagon finally appeared, it looked too small for such a long journey. It moved slowly, wheels crunching over frozen ground. Elijah stayed still as it came closer, as if any movement might invite a feeling he did not understand. Then the woman stepped down. She was not what he expected. She was slight, but she stood steady on the uneven trail. Her dress was worn but clean. Her dark hair was pinned neatly, even after the rough ride. When she lifted her eyes to meet his, there was no fear in them, only calm, like she had already made peace with the life ahead. That calm unsettled him. She introduced herself simply. Her voice was soft but sure, and she thanked him for meeting her as if it was kindness, not obligation. Elijah nodded, but the words stuck in his throat. He was used to speaking to the mountain, to the wind, to himself. Speaking to a person felt like using a muscle he had not touched in years. He took her bag without thinking, and they started toward the cabin. Elijah began explaining mountain life, the way a man explains weather, where the water was drawn, how the fire was kept, which trails were safe, and which could turn deadly without warning. He spoke in short, careful sentences, trying to keep his tone plain. She listened without interrupting. Not once did she question him or complain. She took in each detail like it mattered, like she meant to stay. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low. The space was tidy but bare, built for function, not comfort. Elijah set her bag near the wall and pointed to a small room off the main space. He said it would be hers. He told her in a steady voice that he expected no more from her than shared work and shared space. No romance, no sweet promises, no illusions. He did not look at her when he said it. He feared he might see disappointment and feel responsible for it. But she surprised him. She smiled, not brightly and not foolishly, but with a quiet understanding that settled into the room like warmth. She told him she had not come seeking a fairy tale. She had come for a place to belong and for a man who kept his word. Those words stayed with him longer than they should have. That night, the mountain darkened early. The wind pressed against the cabin walls. Elijah lay in his bed and listened to unfamiliar sounds. Soft footsteps, the careful closing of a door, the steady rhythm of another person breathing under his roof. He expected the feeling to annoy him, to make him restless. Instead, something else happened. For the first time in years, the silence did not feel empty. Days followed with a cautious rhythm, like two strangers learning how to share the same trail without stepping on each other's feet. Elijah watched her quietly. He expected awkwardness, mistakes, fear. But she moved through the cabin as if she had lived hard enough to know how to adapt. She learned the stove quickly. She treated his tools with respect. When she asked questions, they were thoughtful, not doubtful. And when she spoke about her past, she did so without bitterness. She acknowledged loss like a fact, not a wound. She wanted to show the world. Elijah told himself not to look for more, not to read meaning into small things, not to notice how she left a mug warming near the fire for him when he came back from the cold, not to notice how she saw his injured shoulder stiffen and adjusted the heavier work without saying a word. Because this marriage was not meant to change him. It was meant to endure. Yet change came anyway, quiet as snow falling in the night. It came so softly he did not see it until the morning when the world looked different, and he could not explain why. Elijah found himself lingering at the table longer than usual, listening when she spoke. He noticed the softness in her laughter when something small amused her. He noticed the strength in her silence when words were not needed. One evening, a storm howled outside and the fire burned low. She looked at him and asked about the scar along his jaw. Not like she wanted to pry, but like she wanted to understand. The memory rose in him before he could push it down. And to his own surprise, he started talking. He told her a story he had never told anyone. His voice was rough, his words slow, and something deep in his chest felt tight as he spoke. She did not flinch. She did not try to fix what could not be fixed. She just listened, steady and quiet. When he finished, she thanked him for trusting her. That simple sentence hit him harder than it should have. It made him feel something he had forgotten how to hold: warmth. Spring did not arrive all at once on the mountain. It came slow, like it was not sure it was welcome. Snow still clung to the shaded places, hiding in the cracks between rocks and trees, but the air softened day by day. Mornings carried a thin light that did not cut as sharp as before. Elijah Crow noticed the change most in himself. He woke before dawn and lay still, listening. For years, mornings had started in silence, broken only by wind or the snap of the fire dying out. Now there were other sounds: a kettle being set on the stove, a careful step across the floor, a quiet breath from the next room. Strange as it felt, those sounds became the calmest part of his day. For most of his life, Elijah believed solitude was strength. Needing no one meant no one could leave him. No one could fail him. No one could break what he had worked so hard to hold together. The mountain had taught him that lesson early and well, but the woman who came to him under a cold agreement began to undo that belief without trying. She did it simply by staying, their days filled with work, the kind that never truly ended on the mountain. They repaired a fence winter storms had beaten down. They cleared heavy branches from the trail where snow had snapped old trees. They turned soil for a small garden in the one place sunlight lingered longest. Elijah worked as he always had, steady and quiet. But now he was not alone. He watched her hands as she worked. They were capable hands, quick and careful. She did not rush, but she did not waste time. There was a gentleness in the way she handled even rough tasks, like she respected the land rather than fought it. The more Elijah noticed, the more something stirred inside him. It was not only admiration, it was fear. Admiration pulled a man closer. Fear warned him what closeness could cost. She spoke more now, still not much, but enough to fill the space between them. She pointed out how the fog settled low over the trees in the morning. She mentioned how the creek sounded different when the ice broke. Once, while they stood near the cabin watching clouds move slow across the sky, she said softly that it must have been lonely for him all those years. She did not say it like blame. She said it like truth. The words tightened his chest. No one had ever named his loneliness out loud. People in the valley had called him strong. They called him wild. They called him hard. No one asked what it did to a man to spend decades speaking only to the wind. Elijah said nothing. He did not trust his voice with that truth yet. He tried to keep distance. He reminded himself the marriage had begun out of need and should remain practical. But practicality failed when he noticed small changes in the cabin. The table was set for two even on days he spoke little. His coat was hung closer to the fire so it would dry faster. A second blanket appeared on his chair without a word. These were not grand acts, but they carried the weight of care, and care softened places he had kept frozen for years. The turning moment came on a day that should have been ordinary. Elijah went farther down the trail than usual to check his traps. Snow had melted enough to turn the ground slick, and patches of mud hid under thin sheets of ice. He stepped wrong near a place he had crossed 100 times before. His boots slid. His body twisted. He fell hard against a hidden rock. Pain shot through him, sharp and sudden. His breath left him in a harsh gasp. His shoulder burned, and warm blood spread under his shirt. He lay there, staring up at the branches above, the sky broken into pieces by needles of pine. Fear rose in him, raw and unfamiliar. Not fear of death, fear of leaving her alone. He forced himself up, teeth clenched, every movement dragging pain through his body. Each step back toward the cabin felt like fire under his skin. When he finally reached the door, his strength gave out. He collapsed in the doorway like a man twice his age. She was there in an instant. The sound she made was not a scream. It was a broken gasp, like something inside her tore open. Then she moved with calm purpose. She pulled him inside, laid him down, and went to work like she had done this before. She cleaned the wound. She pressed cloth against the blood. She did her best to set his shoulder. Her hands were steady even while fear shone in her eyes. Elijah drifted in and out of darkness. Between the waves, he felt her presence close. He heard her voice, soft but firm, telling him to stay still, telling him he was not allowed to leave her with this mess of a man. The words should have angered him. Instead, they made him feel wanted. When he woke later, the pain settled into a deep ache. The cabin was dim. The fire burned low. She sat nearby, hands clasped tight, eyes red from worry. She looked up the moment he stirred, like she had not let herself rest at all. She helped him drink water. No mocking, no scolding, only care. Elijah stared at the ceiling and realized no one had ever looked after him like this. Not out of duty, not as payment, but because she could not bear the thought of losing him. Recovery forced him into stillness. It forced him to accept help. Helplessness stripped away the hard shell he wore like armor. In those quiet days, she spoke more of her past. She told him her first marriage taught her endurance, not love. She lived years feeling unseen, like a shadow in her own home. When she became a widow, she learned loneliness in a crowded place could feel worse than solitude in an empty one. That was why she came. Not because she expected happiness, but because she wanted honesty. A life where silence was real, not fake. Elijah listened, his chest tight. He confessed in a rough voice that he never expected her to change anything. He prepared for shared space, not shared life. He planned for survival, not connection. She looked at him calm and firm and told him she did not come to be endured. She came to belong. Those words demanded a choice. And Elijah had built his life avoiding choices that involved other people. As his strength returned, spring fully claimed the mountain. Wildflowers pushed through thawed soil. Birds returned to the trees. The air smelled of wet earth and promise. With the land waking up, their bond deepened. They laughed sometimes, surprised by the sound. Elijah began to imagine a future that was more than survival. A future with shared evenings by the fire. a warmth that had nothing to do with flames. Then the mountain tested them. It began with voices on the trail. Elijah stepped outside and saw movement between the trees. Men from the valley climbed toward the cabin, carrying bags and papers, wearing expressions that did not belong here. Old instincts surged in him fast. Protect. Push away. Stand alone. He told her he would handle it. He told her to consider leaving before things turned dangerous. The hurt in her eyes cut deeper than his injury. Before she could answer, the men reached the clearing. The leader lifted a folded document like a weapon. He said the land was no longer Elijah's. A railroad wanted a route through the mountain. The valley decided Elijah's claim was not valid. The cabin was his life, every board cut by his hands. Every winter survived here. Elijah told them to leave. They did not move. The leader warned they would return with more men if Elijah did not come down to sign. Elijah turned to tell her to pack, to go somewhere safe. She stepped beside him instead. She did not hide. She stood close enough that he felt her strength. She asked one simple question. Where was their proof? The leader dismissed her. She did not move. For the first time, Elijah felt relief standing with someone instead of alone. The men left with threats, but they left fear behind. That night, the cabin felt tight. Elijah stared at the table, trying to fight papers with no voice. He said he would handle it alone. She laid old documents in front of him and told him the truth needed a voice. He told her to leave again. The hurt returned. She asked if pushing people away was how he handled fear. Elijah realized he stood where he always had, back against the world, alone. He looked at her and saw what he would lose. He admitted he did not know how to belong to someone. She told him she was not asking for perfection. She asked him to stop shutting her out. Elijah nodded. The next morning they went down the mountain together. The valley watched. Elijah felt small among people, but she walked steady beside him. Inside the office, lies began to crack under questions. An older man remembered Elijah's filing. Pressure grew. Truth surfaced. The threat broke. They left the office together. Outside, Elijah stopped and looked at her. He said he was glad she stayed. She said she never wanted to leave. They climbed back up the mountain together. The trail felt different now. When they reached the cabin, Elijah saw it clearly for the first time. It was not just shelter. It was home. Summer settled over the mountain like a quiet promise. The days grew longer, and the sunlight reached places it never had before. The cabin no longer felt like a shelter pressed against the world. It felt open, alive, as if it was breathing along with the land around it. Elijah Crow felt the change every morning when he stepped outside. The air was warmer. The wind no longer cut through him like a blade. And when he turned back toward the cabin, he no longer saw just a building of wood and stone. He saw a place where someone waited. The land dispute did not vanish overnight. The valley office sent letters. Men talked. Rumors moved faster than truth. But the threat no longer held the same power. Elijah had faced it. He had spoken, and he had not done it alone. That mattered more than he could explain. The woman stayed steady through it all. She did not press him. She did not celebrate too early. She simply lived beside him, sharing the work and the quiet, trusting that what they had built together would hold. And it did. The garden they planted began to grow. Green shoots pushed through the soil, fragile but stubborn. Elijah watched them with a strange sense of pride. He had always believed strength meant standing against the world. Now he saw strength in tending something living, something that needed care. Evenings became his favorite time of day. They sat outside the cabin when the light softened, watching the sky change color. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they did not. The silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt full, like a shared understanding that did not need words. Elijah noticed how easily her presence fit into his life now. The rhythm of their days felt natural, not forced. He found himself reaching for her without thinking, handing her tools, asking her thoughts, listening when she spoke. Trust had settled between them slowly, like deep roots taking hold. One night as they sat near the fire, Elijah realized something that made his chest tighten. He could not imagine the cabin without her anymore. The thought did not bring fear. It brought clarity. He had built his life to survive alone. Now he wanted to live it with someone. The realization did not come with grand words or sudden gestures. It came quietly, the way most true things did in his life. He looked at her across the firelight and saw, not obligation, not agreement, but choice. She was here because she wanted to be, and so was he. He spoke that night in a voice that still carried rough edges, but held honesty. He told her he had never planned for love. He told her he thought needing someone was weakness. He admitted he had been wrong. She listened the same way she always had, steady and open. When he finished, she told him she never came to change him. She came to stand beside him. She said love did not mean taking away his strength. It meant sharing it. Elijah felt something settle deep inside him, like a long-held weight finally laid down. The land issue returned one last time at the end of summer. Another letter arrived, formal and cold. Elijah read it slowly, then folded it and set it aside. He no longer felt that old fear twist in his gut. He knew who he was. He knew what he had built. And he knew who he stood with. They went down to the valley together again. This time, Elijah walked with his head up. He spoke clearly. Others listened. The claim was settled. The mountain was his. When they returned home, Elijah stood in the clearing and let the quiet sink in. The trees, the wind, the cabin. All of it felt different now, not because it had changed, but because he had. As autumn approached, the mountain prepared for another winter. Elijah stocked wood and supplies as he always had, but the work felt lighter. He was not preparing for isolation anymore. He was preparing for shared nights, shared warmth, shared life. On the first cold evening of the season, they sat together by the fire. Snow had not fallen yet, but the air hinted it would soon. Elijah looked at her and felt no fear of the long months ahead. For the first time, winter did not feel like something to endure. It felt like something to face together. Elijah Crow had prepared for a cold, loveless marriage on the mountain. He had expected survival and silence. What he found instead was belonging, and that changed everything.